Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. On the show today, a look back at Argentina. Should the sprint results set the grid for Sunday's Grand Prix? Is Franco Morbidelli back? What on earth happened to Fabio Quartararo this weekend? And the reigning champ shows us a chink in his armour. Plus, all the Moto2 and Moto3 action reviewed and your questions answered. Remember, if you want to send us a question, you can voice note us or send it in written form. Do it on your phone. You can email us. It's podcast@crash.net, along with your name and where you're from. If you're going to voice note us, please keep it to 30 seconds-ish, and we shall get you on the show. Right, recording day is Tuesday the 4th of April. My name is Harry Benjamin. Joining me, as always, is Crash MotoGP editor Pete McLaren and former Grand Prix rider and British champion Keith Hewin. And Keith, let's try and start maybe chronologically. Another sprint race under our belts now. Binder heroics on lap 1 saw him take the win. All the questions that we've had come in off the back of the sprint races, should the sprint finishing positions determine the grid for Sunday's Grand Prix?
Well, you set us off with a question there, but this is going to be so varied throughout the hour, isn't it? Because we've had so much that's gone on here. I mean, I think people are actually doing it just to blast our bloody predictions out of the water with one thing and another. KTM, Binder, you couldn't meet a better guy or a nicer guy when it comes to what he does and how he does it. And to take that sprint win was just outstanding. I mean, KTM, they've come from nowhere. None of this was seen in testing. Everything is about racing. I know they've got two of the best racers in the world, as in Binder, or should I say the most determined racers in the world, in Binder and Miller. You're going to get the best out of those two guys. Argentina, we've seen some great rides from both of them there in the past. As we have Bezzecchi, the guy who actually took it all on Sunday. But going back to your point, I suppose, I mentioned this last time, didn't I? If we are not going to get to the situation where people don't believe it's worthwhile carrying on running, mind you, I tripped myself up with that one, really. If we carry on the way we're going, there's only going to be 9 people in the bloody race anyway, so they're all going to score points. So, but we'll get there in a minute as well. 5 out of it, of course. But it would stop people from pulling out or not trying as hard as they need to try if they were grid position for Sunday, if the sprint race set up grid positions for Sunday. We've not seen that yet, but I feel that will evolve as the year moves on. People will work out whether it's worth saving engines, whether it will be, as we move on through the year, whether it will be worth saving, mileage or whatever it might be, or even crash damage at the end of the day. I mean, I would think budgets are going to be, they must be already stretched in a couple of teams already. When was the last time we didn't have any Repsol Hondas out on the grid, I wonder? Like with Mir out as well now, 5 riders, 5 of the top line riders. Then we get a KTM that wins a sprint race. Then we get Morbidelli with 2 fourth places. Where did Morbidelli come from? Where did the real Morbidelli all of a sudden stood up? Quartararo has imploded at Yamaha. I mean, I would think you come away from that flight, scratching your head. If you were any of the teams trying to work out what just happened, what did we just see?
Clearly getting off the flight, lots of questions for Fabio Quartararo. But, it was Marco Bezzecchi who took the Grand Prix win. And I believe Pete and I did have that as our prediction, not for the win, but for a first-time winner would be in the form of Bezzecchi. He'd get it first. Keith, you went with Alex Marquez, which looks like it's on the horizon, as to for Zarco. But, let's talk about Bezzecchi. What a brilliant ride from him. Second in the sprint and then converting to a Grand Prix win on Sunday.
It's the only thing he dropped was the sprint, wasn't it, Pete? He had warm-up, he was quickest man over the weekend all round, winner of the main race, of course. I loved his quote afterwards, and I wrote it down because I hate quotes that aren't quotes. I just I've made them up. I woke up with a strange sensation. I know we all do, but he woke up with a strange sensation. Normally, I'm not very good with the MotoGP in the wet. Well, the strange sensation certainly worked out for him. He'll be hoping he gets another one of them next time out at Cota, that's for sure. But he's been good round Argentina before, and he's on the lips as he is on your two. He's your man for winning his first race, and he's done it. He's done a fantastic job, but he was so dominant, it was slightly scary. And by contrast, his best mate, the trash talking between the two of them, he slips off on, with 8 laps to go or whatever it is, Bagnaia. Actually, that was really classy. I know falling off wasn't classy, but did you watch him as he slid off? He slided up the road and he's got to about 30 mile an hour. You can just see his hand pull the clutch in. He just reaches for the clutch just to make sure that thing's still could be running by the time he needs to pick it up. I mean, that is presence of mind when you just dumped yourself out of the race. You don't kick the bike away. He's just thinking, how can I save this? It was a really good shot. Dorna cameraman. I love Dorna cameraman. They're just so good. They pick up all those little bits and bobs. But that for me as an ex-rider was class.
Yeah, I mean, both races were pretty exciting, weren't they, for different reasons, as you say. And Bezzecchi, first win also for Rossi's team, of course, in the top class. So a big boost for them all round, as you say, double podium on the day before, and then poor old Zarco in second. I say poor old because yet again he extends that run of most podiums without a race win. I think he's up to about 16 or something now, and he's still waiting for that win. We're talking about Bezzecchi. He's achieved his goal of coming into the year of a race win at his second round, doesn't he? So, and Alex Marquez on the podium, first time since 2020. I mean, all satellite Ducati podium. It's another shock result. We didn't predict it, did we, obviously? But who would? And that's the great thing, that the fact that you don't know what's going to happen and that these guys do have a great chance of being up there, whatever machinery they're on. And Bezzecchi, well, it's a bit like Bastianini Part 2, isn't it, from last year?
It's quite. You mentioned that should we have points or should we use the sprint races grid positions for Sunday? And yet there's a fair bit of movement at the moment. People in the paddock. The sprint race is so good. It's like they want 3 sprint races now. 2 on Sunday. They almost want to steal the thunder of World Superbikes, really. I hope not. I think a long race is where we're at with a prototype MotoGP, to be honest. But I can see why people are banging the drum for it. All of those naysayers, all the ones that were, this is madness and all the rest of it, seem to have settled back a little bit into it this week. It seems to be more, even though there were difficult conditions. If I may, I'm sure you're going to get to Moto3 and Moto2. I think I just felt this weekend a little bit sorry, if that's the right phrase, for Moto3 and Moto2. They've been pushed back really substantially when it comes to television airtime to a certain extent, track time as well. That no warm-up on a Sunday, that's a major step for me. A fellow called John Wilson wrote to me and he said, what's the story here? What happens if they've had wet track time prior to Sunday and they don't get a warm-up in the dry? There's no allowance for that. The other way round, they get extra warm-up laps, sighting laps, so they can go through pit lane and do another lap if they want. They can go to the grid straight away, or they can come through pit lane and do another lap. That's a hell of a way to bloody break up your concentration when you're trying to work out which bit of the track's got a puddle on it and which bit ain't. I just think that Moto3 and Moto2 have been shortchanged a bit at the moment. Anybody who's a major supporter of Moto3 and Moto2 are being shortchanged also. Same with the television. In the UK, it's disappeared onto the red button for their free practices. I note that the broadcaster here, BT Sport, got it a lot better in Argentina than they did for the first round. That was a disaster area when they didn't put FP3 up there, didn't have their own commentators on the go on Friday, so on and so forth. So they've sorted that out to a great extent. I can understand why television companies might put the lesser classes, sorry for calling them lesser classes, but you know where I'm coming from, on the red button. There may be other sporting events and things that they've got to do, and they do give a lot of time to MotoGP in every other instance. So I can understand why that might happen, but I can't understand why Dorna, apart from time constraints, don't want or are not allowing a warm-up for Moto3 and Moto2. I think that is borderline, well, I won't say dangerous, but it's certainly pushing the boundaries of what's acceptable, I would say, from Moto3 and Moto2. And I'm surprised we haven't heard more people screaming about it in the paddock, to be honest. This weekend, they've done no wet mileage, or very little. There was a dry line most of the time. It was damp maybe when they'd been out, but then they had a full-on wet situation on Sunday morning, and they couldn't warm up to that. They couldn't make sure they got, into the feel of a racetrack. A racetrack changes anyway, but when it's fully wet, you want to know where those lines are. You want to know where the puddles are, where things are laying, and to have just 2 sighting laps to get used to a fully wet track, I think that's asking a lot in a professional sport, personally.
It does seem strange that they couldn't just fit in a 10-minute warm-up, for those classes. There does seem to be a bit of a gap, doesn't there, on Sunday mornings now? We were talking about it last week. You've got these massively intense Saturdays now of action, and then there's sort of a bit of a lull on Sunday mornings, only the MotoGP warm-up. So it does seem strange they couldn't sort of fit a bit of a warm-up in. Of course, there's no guarantee that the rain or something might not arrive until after the warm-up. But of course, there's one more chance to get the same conditions as the race, isn't there? But going back to your points about the whole sprint race thing, I mean, yeah, I know I've mentioned this before, but I just can't get my head around the fact that Brad Binder didn't officially win. You know, if you look at his stats on the website,
yeah,
he still hasn't won a MotoGP race since 2021. Well, we saw him win. It was a fantastic win, but it's not there because it doesn't count. It just seems a bit weird and a bit artificial to me. Also, Marini, he doesn't still have a podium because he came in the sprint, which doesn't count. If you look at Bezzecchi's, for example, his stats, it says, and this is the way, you know, that it has to be shown at the moment because of the sprint thing. It's not a race, it's a sprint and all that. So it says 2 starts for the year, when of course there's been 4, but only the Grand Prix starts count. So 2 starts, 1 win, 50 points. Well, you know, if you got 50 points from 2 starts, that means 2 wins. But of course, the Grand Prix points do count for the sprint, but everything else doesn't. It just seems confusing to me. And then to add to that, the Moto2 race was reduced to 14 laps, wasn't it? For the reasons Keith mentioned about sighting laps and everything else. That's only 2 laps more than Brad Binder did on the Saturday, and yet Tony Arbolino, nothing against him, won a Grand Prix on the Sunday over 14 laps. Brad Binder didn't win a Grand Prix on the Saturday over 12. I just can't get my head around that. I hope that it will change. I think it's confusing, but having said that, not many people seem to agree with me. But yeah,
I think most people in the paddock, Peter, will agree with you. That's for certain. I mean, MotoGP.com, if you don't go on MotoGP.com, you can look at the results pages and stuff like that, print off the results. We all do it because it's usually a great site. It just fries your brain now trying to work out what's what Pete's just said. If you go on MotoGP.com, go on the results page and start, you get the rider, I can't remember what it's called now, rider positions or rider performance. That's it, rider performance. It's under other something or the other. It's quite a confusing site for the sidebar and stuff like that. But if you go on rider performance, try and make sense of that if you can. Exactly what Pete's saying. It's got one figure in here that says what you might think and another one that says something completely different that confuses it. They haven't really sorted it out. You would have thought that they'd have actually sorted a printout that was pretty self-explanatory, like they've always been in the past. You know, you do your research, after a race or something, you print it all out. I mean, here we are, I'm going, you know, as usual, you know, it's all printed out. I never ever look at it, but it's all there. And it gives you all the information you need at a glance, but all of a sudden it's not at a glance. You then have to get the sheets out to see who did what in what sprint and who did what in what race, because a sprint and a race are 2 different things nowadays.
Yeah, to me, that's the confusing thing. I think I actually quite like the fact it doesn't count for a grid. I know that we've gone on the pros and cons and you can argue it. I'm actually fine with that, having it as a separate race, but I think it's a race. You know, people know what they see, and they saw Brad Binder win a MotoGP race. And the fact that it doesn't appear now on his profile and even, you know, things like that, I don't know. I just find that odd. I know it's because the statistics that we're talking about again, isn't it? It's because if you try to compare it with riders from the past, obviously with 42 races, everything would be slanted. But then the statistics are not some sort of pure thing anyway. The Argentina race back in the 1960s, I had a quick look, was 1 hour and 50 minutes or something, or 40 minutes. So twice the length of a MotoGP race now. So a MotoGP race now on a Sunday is a sprint race compared to the old races then. So I just think a race is a race. You call it a race. A win's a win.
Maybe there's something to be had here because Brad Binder won the first ever GP race on April Fool's Day, on the 1st of April. Martin Rain, Dr. Martin Rain. That's the first in all Grand Prix. That's the first time one's ever been won on the 1st of April.
Oh, there you go. They should commentate that.
I don't know where Martin Rain. I don't think Martin Rain sleeps to come up with stats like that.
It is a really interesting debate though, because I suppose another argument may be, well, you know, look at Bezzecchi. The points he's scored from all of the races and the sprint is what has propelled him to lead the championship. So then you go, well, if you're not counting the wins in these sprints, well the points are going towards the overall championship. So surely that should count for something.
You get Grand Prix points, but not Grand Prix wins or
accolades.
I mean, we've been here before. There may be something deeper than this. I mean, it might be contractually that you know, manufacturers have got to pay massive grade bonuses if it's called a Grand Prix. there will be something behind the scenes contractually that's made it this way, and it'll evolve as we move into 2024. I'm sure of that. I mean, Dorna. The one thing you can say about Dorna, they're not asleep.
Will they change anything up middle of the year, do you think, or whether is it kind of cemented and any
I think
changes
it's cemented where we are at the moment. I mean, I think that all the big changes really come at the end of this year, don't they, for next year and beyond. And yeah, we've got all sorts of things that are coming up for 2024 and onwards. And I mean, from a management point of view, you imagine where you are from a management point of view now as well. I mean, they must be spinning around in a 360-degree circle doing donuts, these guys, trying to work out what on earth they're going to do strategically for 2024, because all of a sudden we've got everybody's as good as everybody virtually. Got everybody capable of winning at some stage in these 42 races. You know, I wonder if we're going to have a situation where everybody's at a podium by the time we get to the end of the year.
Well, I read somewhere that I mean, the championship will be decided on the person who crashes out the least, pretty much. I know that can be said for every season, but I think it's more so because you've got double the amount of races, double the amount of jeopardy, really.
Well, Pete alluded to that a minute ago, didn't he? I mean, in the olden days, you'd have like 9 rounds or something. Yeah, and the point scoring was different as well. I mean, so comparing, you can't, it's like apples and pears. You can't compare with what happened in the olden days. I think that's then, this is now. I mean, we're in a very, very intense situation now as well with regard to everything. I mean, everybody is working so hard to make this work. I think I think we're in a fantastic position, but I think this year is an evolution to see where we go for 2024. I think it definitely needs some tweaks here and there. We've got 5 riders out now because Johan Mir ended up out as well. So both the Repsol Honda top men were out come race day. Actually, 17 riders on the grid, that's getting pretty poor. You know, we're in a situation where, you know, maybe the next thing is to try and bring some more teams in here. I mean, I wonder whether there is a situation where it can be expanded somewhat. Yamaha certainly need to expand. You know, there should be really a minimum of 24 riders on the grid, I would have said. You know, you can soak up some of the slack in that situation. Sorry to refer to injured riders as slack. I didn't mean that at all, by the way. It was just a phrase I was using. I just suddenly shot myself when I said that. But, you know, when you've got a situation like we've got now, and is it going to get any better? I don't think so in the year with all these races that we've got going on. And it doesn't seem to matter now whether we've got a sprint or a main race. Blimey, those first couple of laps, you are just, I mean, I can't breathe. I'm sat on a sofa and I'm bloody need oxygen just to watch it. And I mean, and you have to appreciate, and I went into this last blog, last time we were talking, you know, to appreciate what those guys are doing in those conditions, rubbing that hard with each other at 200 mile an hour is phenomenal. I mean, we're all sort of relaxed and laid back on our sofas and beer in hand or whatever you might be, watching it go, oh, look at this great fun. Blimey, it's like gladiators, you know, they've got everything except swords. I honestly, I'm so impressed with the way these guys are racing at the moment, and it is borderline. It is as borderline as I've ever seen it in my life. Moto3, we come to almost accept it, but now it's in MotoGP. You know, like there isn't any quarter given anywhere at any time, in any condition. Bloody impressive, really.
Just to answer your original question, Harry, about what might change during this year, there's a big announcement coming up of the new chief operating officer. I think that the official title is at Dorna, isn't it? I think the expectation is that role will be announced at COTA coming up, and that it's an English-speaking person. That's all we know, and it's somebody coming from the outside. Now, because it's in America, we're all sort of assuming it's an American, but we'll have to wait and see. But either way, it's an important role. It's a commercial role. Bringing someone in with new ideas. Interesting to see what changes there, whether there's quick changes, as you say. You know, Harry, could something change this year? I mean, things like the stats and the sprint race wins, they can do that. You know, they can click their fingers, can't they? And even just backdate it, it's not that important. It's just annoying, I think, a bit now for some people maybe that you see something happen on track. You see a rider cross the line first, the checkered white flag waves, he won, but then he didn't win, you know. But that kind of thing could be corrected. But it'd be interesting to see behind the scenes what changes this new chief operating officer brings in.
Interesting you say that, and I always like trying to get a Formula One link in just for Harry, don't I? I mean, Rivola, when he came across to Aprilia, he came in there and everybody went, Formula One guy. Right at the turning point of Aprilia, you know, how much input and how much that was already in the pipeline, we won't know. But certainly he seems to have steadied that ship. You know, Albessiano, who was basically the head man in the paddock, prior, he had a reputation for being a bit sparkly and a bit ruthless here and there as well. And if you're a second rider, then you needed him on side, really, because you could find yourself without a ride by the end of the year. I think that Rivola definitely has steadied that ship. And look at where Aprilia are now and what they're doing now. So I think sometimes an outside pair of skilled eyes, skilled hands coming in can make that difference. And maybe Dorna have recognised that. I mean, I know a lot of people get stuck into Dorna for family members being, chief of this and chief of that, chief of everything. But if you look realistically, pretty much most of the people that got promoted in Dorna, even if they were, sons of, daughters of, actually do a bloody good job. And they're there because they do a good job, pretty much. But I suppose that Dorna are also kind of sensitive to the bad PR they get for promoting family members or close relatives or, illegitimate children of, and so on and so forth. So maybe now that we've got a new CEO coming in from outside, it'll be an interesting turn as this year rolls on, as I say, to the 2024 transition into new rules and new ideas.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, part of me wonders whether they might just add in as well, this year, 10-minute warm-up for Moto3, Moto2, whatever, just to try.
You might be right there, Harry.
Yeah.
I mean, you might that might be a change because there is room for it and it's easy to do, And I think that there will be some pushback in Moto3 and Moto2 paddocks, without doubt, because that warm-up in the morning is your last chance to try something, to get something right, to look at the track, It's not just, not just there for going round and round the first thing in the morning to blow the cobwebs off. It is a very useful 10 minutes if you've had a problem through what is now a very intense Saturday.
You reminded me there, Keith. Question for you, Harry. When they do the F1 driver parade, when is that directly before the race or is it after, is it earlier in the morning?
It's earlier in the morning.
Right, yeah, because the MotoGP one is happening after the warm-up. This is what we're talking about. There's a bit of a gap on Sunday. And some people have said, well, there's not many fans in the grandstands then. It'd be better to put it a bit later. But I just wondered when it was F1. Maybe it's the same time then. But, because that's obviously a new addition for this year. They're taking them round and away to the fans and things. But sometimes it seems like it's a bit early, with the races taking place later. The grandstands are still filling up.
Yeah, that's a
You'd
good
be better
point,
off with an air display.
Well, they had the F1 car in Portimao,
Well, I've
didn't
been
they?
going to, but there was a technical
Did it not happen?
problem. No, there was a technical problem with it. So unfortunately, it didn't happen.
We don't like them leaking oil.
Yeah, definitely not. Well, I'll tell you what, in terms of our predictions, a couple of points were picked up. Half a point for Pete for his sprint race prediction of who did you get? You got Bezzecchi, but you didn't get him in the right order. And then Keith was the only one to pick up points in the Grand Prix predictions. Can you believe that? What did you get? You got 2 points for Alex Marquez, and so one for him being on the podium and one for him being in third place. So well done, Keith.
He's
you now
quietly
lead.
working away at it, Alex Marquez. He's Bezzecchi's been the big headline and Binder obviously this weekend, but Marquez is there or thereabouts all the time. He's chipping away at it. I was quite impressed with him this weekend, not just because I picked him, but
those wins for him and like Johann Zarco are surely just around the corner now with the dominance of this Ducati.
We've been saying that for Zarco for God knows how long,
But now more so than ever.
I think, Pete, did you say earlier on in the build-up in this that was for the first win for Ducati at Termas?
I didn't. I said it was the all satellite program, but I think it was the
first ever win for Ducati at Termas de Rio Hondo. So they had a big weekend again.
Well, we'll see. Pete, I want to talk about Franco Morbidelli. Is he back? The return. Last year, I read your article on him, outscored 248 points to 42, and now he's in front of his teammate Fabio Quartararo after a disaster, basically Argentina and Fabio. But Franco with 2 P4s running up the front, looking strong, looking stable. Is he back?
I mean, that's obviously what everyone was asking all weekend, and he's he's still going to jump on this and go, yes, I'm back. He's trying to keep calm, but definitely, his best weekend since 2021 when he was on the podium at Jerez, and before he joined the factory team. It seemed like the track is low grit, and it seems that Morbidelli does better in those circumstances than Quartararo. Quartararo sort of uses the corner speed to make up for the lack of power on the Yamaha. But it seemed like, and Keith will be able to explain this more, but it seemed like he wasn't able to do that this weekend. Whereas Morbidelli, and perhaps with this extra engine power they've got this year as well, chipping in there, it just seemed to suit him more there, because he didn't have a great weekend in Argentina last year. So, but as you say, transformed, and let's hope it's a turning point for him. But yeah, it's definitely too early to say for sure, and that's what he was saying as well. You need to go to Cota and see if he can repeat it again. But certainly Quartararo said, Frankie, this track, Sepang test when it's low grip, they're definitely closer, let's say, when there's low grip. So the question will be, when the grip level rises, can Frankie still be as competitive, I think?
Most impressive thing for me, Pete, was the fact he was aggressive, that he was sticking it in there. I mean, you need confidence to do that, and it's always looked like he's lacked confidence. So that will be down to the, being able to race at that grip level situation for sure. But I still think that he did look like a bit of a changed man. I mean, he's a very intelligent fella. He's one of these guys that thinks about every single millimetre he covers. But is he back? I think, based on what I saw at the weekend, with how aggressive and confident he was riding in very, very difficult conditions, I'd say yes. But I can't imagine how he switched it like that. That's the bit I can't fathom, is how he went from zero to hero, as opposed to the other way for some riders. So it's kind of one of them ones where, Cota is a tough track as well. I mean, the Circuit of the Americas is a physical track. You don't know what you're going to get until you get there. Hopefully the track will be in reasonable condition, Weather-wise, it can be cooking or cool, one or the other. So we're going to find out what we get when we get to the Circuit of the Americas. But I'd say, based on that, his confidence level is 100% higher than it was prior to Argentina. And hopefully that puts the pressure now on Quartararo as well. Quartararo is the one that's in trouble here at the moment. He's not only struggling with what he's doing with his motorbike, but now all of a sudden his teammates outscoring him. That is going to be something to... And Quartararo is an emotional type rider. He's not one of these steely, types. Stuff gets to him. He waves his hands about, he throws his arms in the air, he stamps his feet, and suddenly he's now going to be looking inwardly. What on earth went wrong there? How comes, Frankie got that so right, and we got it so wrong on our side of the garage. Difficult times at Yamaha. But they always find some little sparkle somewhere, don't they? And now it's Morby.
Can you explain to me how, and forgive me for being naive, but if Frankie's better on a low track, on a low grip track, how is that? Surely, in my head, the more grip you got, the better you're going to go.
Feel. It's a funny thing, because the more grip you got, you've put more inertia through everything. You're taking liberties with where you're going with it, and you've got to have confidence to be able to find that last millimetre in the dry and in the wet. Wet is confidence. Wet is how you relax, how you feel, how the bike feels with you. Now maybe that bike, the limit that Frankie finds in the wet is better than he does when he's got a dry setup on there. I mean, it's all about setup at the end of the day, and you'll understand that as a car guy. The tiniest little tweaks make the biggest of differences sometimes. But it's about confidence, about how you feel about yourself. And that's the thing that baffles me with Frankie Morbidelli, because he's gone from looking like he doesn't have the confidence to really, swing his arms about in the race. And yet here he was. I mean, I was expecting at one point for him to slip backwards, but really, 2 fourth places in those situations, in those conditions, pretty damn good. I'd have said that he must come out at Cota with a much higher confidence level than he had going in to Argentina.
I mean, wet and dry, isn't it? That was the thing as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it was to see him in one of those conditions, you'd say, okay, he's got, things have just fallen into place for him. But to do it in both of those, I think that was really impressive. And Quartararo, of course, opening lap instance again, wasn't it? This time Nakagami sort of dived up the inside of him. No penalty, Keith. Do you think that was the right call?
I've always said it. I mean, we saw it with Lorenzo go back a few years at Argentina. Like if you qualify badly and you're in the middle of that bun fight into turn one, and you get nudged, pushed, shoved every way, which way, people are looking to just grab the brakes half an inch later than you did, just to try and ram it up the inside. They've got to try and get, everyone's got to try to get to the front before it all breaks up and everybody, gets line astern. Quartararo, you've got to qualify. It's always a problem. If you do not qualify on that front 2 rows of the grid, you're going to find yourself in all sorts of trouble. Front row preferably at some tracks. But, because again, if you go and stand on the grid, there's 10 metres between the rows. There's a I can't remember how much it is between first and third place across the front row, but there's a fair gap between lines. When you look at it on the telly and everyone's looking at that camera that goes point straight at them, they all look quite close. But to make up 10 metres from the start, you can't. You've got to make it up on the brakes. You've got to hope someone's slack or they've all gone for the inside line and you ride around the outside of them. But you immediately put yourself in danger when you're in a big group like that. You can, especially if you're on the outside taking the around the houses type route. What did Lorenzo used to have on his helmet, or Fuera or something like that? Means around the outside, wasn't it? He used to have that slogan on his helmet because of one incident where he did ride around the outside of everybody. Some very famous names as well. So it's a risk strategy and it works. Sometimes you get everybody run by the corner and it's someone that manages to sneak round on the white line. It's just, you leave things to chance if you don't qualify well. And that's the case in all motorsport. You need those extra 10 yards, be on the front row. 10 metre. Sorry.
Ben has asked a question. Going back to 2022, when Dovi was at Yamaha, he was claiming that the Yamaha was lacking traction, whereas Fabio was claiming it needed more power. Did Yamaha listen to Fabio for development rather than Dovi, or have they tried to improve rear traction but failed?
Well, I mean, the traction issues at Yamaha were legendary, because you'd get, as the fuel load went down, it would switch from front to back to front. You'd have no traction at one point, and then you'd have loads of it as the fuel level went down, which was a nightmare scenario because no one could actually find that balancing act in the middle, trying to find where the sweet spot was. And Dovi is a bit of a professor, isn't he? I think we used to think of him as the professor because he would have it all worked out in his head. Do you know what? It's a real pleasure to mention Andrea Dovizioso because he's like the forgotten man. He's just disappeared off the earth, and yet he was so good on a motorbike. One of the very few people who could take it to Marc Marquez in his pomp, so I'm glad that we're talking about Dovi. Clever fella, got it worked out, got on with the job really, really well. But you're right, that transition is still there somewhere with the Yamaha. Excuse me. But what we're finding is a real fine line for all of them. Now, I ain't got to look at the times they're doing. Everybody's on improved times now as well. So you're chasing the tail of a Ducati dragon, really, aren't you? Ducati is so good in all areas now, and Aprilia have come up to match that as well. Yamaha, despite the fact they've got a bit more power, and there's the other problem as well. You give a motorbike a bit more power, that don't mean it's going to be better on the racetrack. It might be worse. As soon as you've got more power or power characteristics delivering power in a different way in a different place, suddenly you open up another can of worms that you've got to sort out. The balance of the bike, how it might respond to that extra power. Look at the Hondas when they went from the Honda ECUs and inertial platform, the two brains on a racing motorcycle. When they went from that to the spec Magneti Marelli ones, they were all at sea. It was to tame that Honda motor. Their own electronics were so advanced. I always remember Colin Edwards saying to me when he rode for the Yamaha team, when they went to Magneti Marelli, he said it's like going back 7 years. He said the electronics was so poor in comparison to what they'd got or the development they got to software-wise within the hardware of the ECU. He said that it was like going back 7 years. He couldn't get on with it. I remember Elisha Spargo could get on with it just about when he rode with Colin. But Colin struggled with the new spec ECUs. So, I mean, electronically, things change. Everything changes. When you get some more horsepower, it's how you manage that. It's how everything else manages the extra little bit of horsepower that you've got. It's not an easy balancing act.
It's a good question, good point to bring up what Dovi said. It was a good explanation he was giving us, wasn't he? Because we're always asking, well, why is Quartararo so much quicker? But it comes back to what we were saying earlier with the grip, doesn't it? That yes, they were all struggling with lack of traction, but Quartararo was somehow able to get more corner speed. That then meant he didn't have to get on the power so much, didn't he? That's what the other riders would say, but they couldn't do that. They couldn't get, well, Dovi as well was explaining, he couldn't get the corner speed to compensate for the lack of traction out of the corner. And so that's what Quartararo was struggling with this weekend. He didn't have that grip, so he wasn't able to sort of make the difference that he normally makes. Now, we'll have to see. But Frankie did say this new engine, more power, as Keith said, looked aggressive. He had more power, even in the wet. He said, I felt the benefit of having that straight line speed. And, so they are feeling, there has been progress in that front. They brought in Luca Marmarini, given them the more power from the engine, and it seems like it is making a difference in races. But as Keith says, if you're Quartararo, you need to start qualifying. His big problem is he's qualified towards the back of the top 10, hasn't he, at both rounds so far, and he's got tangled up in first lap incidents that wouldn't probably happen if he was starting at the front, and he gets held up. His race pace is pretty good, but he's held up, and the race is gone then.
Bike racers make the difference. I think with, again, sorry, Harry, Formula One or car platforms, you've got a stable platform, guy strapped in, the car does what the car does. You could pretty much transpose, most of those top drivers into the top car, and it will probably still win. I was thinking of George Rossi's face when he jumped in Lewis Hamilton's car, and basically was blitzing them all. Suddenly he jumps in into a car and he's capable of winning. It's not the same in bikes. A huge amount of input is to do with the riders, how they adapt to the different characteristics of the same motorcycle they might be riding as their teammate. An obvious example is Marc Marquez, in that he has always done things with the Honda that no one else on another Honda can do. Cal Crutchlow is a very outspoken, straightforward fella. Said, I look at the data and I look exactly what Mark's doing. If I do that, I'm going to crash. It's impossible to emulate what Mark does on a bike. I go back to the time when we went to Michelin's, when we changed to Michelin's. I went to the first test at Sepang in just around the corner from Kuala Lumpur, and I remember watching Valentino Rossi struggle with those new Michelins, because back in the day the Bridgestones had loads of grip at the front, not so much at the back, whereas it swapped round when it got to Michelin's. We got less grip at the front and more grip at the back, so every characteristic of the bike changed. So you were watching all of these real world-class riders crash their brains out at Sepang, smash everything to pieces over 2 or 3 days, and have to change their riding style to suit the new rubber that was fitted, and change obviously the way the bike's set up. And I've watched Valentino Rossi change from the classic Valentino Rossi stance on a motorbike to, I remember him coming out of the sun at one stage and I could just see the shadow, and I thought, who's that? And it looked sort of Marquez-esque, but only Rossi's stature. And I couldn't believe it. He was amiable, even though you can say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And here's Rossi, pretty old, learning new tricks and adapting to that motorbike. And I remember thinking, wow, that just goes to show you what quality Rossi was. I was so impressed, because it's so difficult to change your riding style, but that is what you have to do to get those last few little bits and pieces. That's the icing on the cake. You can change as much as you like with the bike, but you've got to move yourself around on the bike. If you look at the different styles over the years, it's the comparison. Go back to Mick Doohan. What an odd style he had. 5 world championships. It's kind of like, you look at him though and you think, why would you ride a motorbike like that? It was odd, but I tell you what, he made it work every single time. And the same thing, you look through at different styles of different people, and of course it depends on your weight and your height. That's the next thing that's coming. Are we going to end up with rider weights for bike and rider? I think that must come for MotoGP at some stage, as it is for Moto3 and Moto2. So there are so many other elements to it, in racing a motorbike. And Morbidelli, getting back to the original question, he looked class again, and we know he is. He's a very clever man. He's a very fast motorbike racer. Maverick Vinales, look at him, confidence this year all of a sudden. He's another one that's come out of the woodwork that people had written off. Thank heavens he had a little bit longer at it, because if he hadn't done that deal with Aprilia, he might be lost to Grand Prix. You just wonder how many people have fell off the end of the plank before they've had their maximum performances, or before they've got back to where they should be. I'm sure there must be many.
I bet there are.
Just one last thing on Yamaha, that Quartararo said that there's a test coming up after Jerez. So there's COTA, and then there's the Spanish Grand Prix at Jerez, and then they have a test. He's expecting some new parts of that test, which he said they need, new aero parts, maybe some new exhaust, something like that. He said it's not going to change his world, but it will help. Of course, the trouble is the other teams will almost certainly have other new things as well. But we got to remember, he's using the old aero. It's not a long-term fix. That's because it was the best they could find to get it working on the last day of testing. That's the other issue he's got. He said they don't have a base setup yet. They only found their parts on the very final day of testing. And now they're going into Grand Prix weekends, and he's still trying to get the bike as he wants it. Then you have dodgy weather in Argentina, which messes things up. So some new parts coming for Yamaha, but not until the European season starts, let's say.
I want to know what's happened at KTM. I mean, is that a rider thing or is that a machinery thing? Personally, I think it's a rider thing. I think that they've still got the same as what they had when they were testing. It's just that both of their riders, would you put them down as testers, Miller and Binder? I'd probably put them down as more scrappers. I wouldn't put them down as going round and round and round looking for that tenth of a second. Suddenly we're seeing what the pair of them are capable of on that motorbike because we're into racing mode now. And they are the kind of guys that, if you met them in an alley, you'd step to one side, wouldn't you?
I think you're right there, Keith. Yeah, certainly at Sapancas, they had loads of new parts, and I remember, we were debating what the order of the manufacturers, and I put them ahead of Honda, I think, didn't I? And thought, and then I was made to look completely wrong, wasn't I? At Portimao, where they really struggled, but because the impression you got was that they were ahead of Honda in the sense that they had all these parts, they tested them, and all the riders were like, yeah, we know what we're going to use, we're going to put it in place, we'll get to Portimao, and it'll all be great. But they got to Portimao and it wasn't, was it? It was a disaster, the Portimao test. And so that's why things look so bleak for them. But it does seem that, with a bit more time, they've gone, hang on, no, we have got the right parts here. We just need to work out how to use them. And then they stick the two race riders on. As soon as they're in a Grand Prix weekend as well, I think all those things together has got this transformation. I mean, fantastic. What a turnaround. Yeah.
They needed it.
They certainly did. What about down at Gas, though? It's not been the best start for them, but we heard it's Jonas Folger is going to replace Pol Espargaro. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's interesting as well because Jonas Folger is one of those enigmas, isn't he? He was going to be the great new German hope at one point, and he looked like he was headed in that direction. And all of a sudden, and all sorts of personal situations that cropped up, and he just dropped out, literally. I don't know what the equivalent would be, but if you were, A-star student through your A-levels and you got to university and then, looked like you were going to be the best thing since sliced bread, and then you just drop out and never seen. Folger, I don't know whether he's going to be able to do anything. I mean, things have moved. The problem is nowadays things move on so fast. This whole game has moved on so much in the years since Folger's been around. Be interesting to see how fast he is. I mean, from a fan point of view, I rated him very highly back in the day, and he could come up with a performance. If he can get anywhere near what he's capable of doing back then, it will be stunning. But I doubt it, sadly.
I mean, it's good you bring that up, Keith, wasn't it? Because what a rookie year he had up until that point. He was okay. I think was he teammates with Zarco, so it was a great year for Tech 12. Both of them, as rookies, were doing great, but. He was second to Marc Marquez in his home race, wasn't he, in Germany? And like you say, everyone was like, future star here. And then we got to the flyaways. I remember I was in Motegi for the Japanese Grand Prix, and suddenly this announcement came out that he'd withdrawn from the event due to an illness. And it was just out of the blue. No one saw it and didn't race again, did he? He ended up withdrawing from the rest of the season. And then we got the sort of announcement. The intention was to come back the following year that no, he wouldn't come back. And real shock. And then he's been doing a bit of test riding. I think he did a year in the World Superbike Championship. He joined KTM this year officially as a test rider. So he's there with Danny Pedrosa. Mika Kallio is still there as well, but I think Mika is more of a rider sort of coach now. Danny will be doing the Spanish Grand Prix when he is a wild card. So I guess, they need to put somebody on the bike. We're talking about replacements, Keith. You were mentioning all the riders that are out. They need to put somebody on the bike if they're not going to have Pol back for Kota, which he's not going to be. He's going to be 5-6 rounds at least, it looks like, before Pol's fit to return. So they have to put someone on it. And so, Folger's got the nod. So it'll be an interesting, I suppose, comparison for Augusto Fernandez, the only rookie, isn't he? Who had a good weekend, but he's got nobody to really compare to, is he? Being the only newcomer. So that'll be quite interesting to see what their relative pace is like.
I think that might be another thing that they're going to look at team-wise, manufacturer-wise as well. We talked about it, I think, in the last episode, in that the backup that they need now for 42 races, the possibility of running out of riders effectively through injury. They've got test riders, and Folger's obviously coming in this time around. We see quite a lot of test riders, but is that pool big enough for all of the manufacturers to be able to draw from? I alluded to the fact that we could have, maybe some World Superbike guys coming in and having a little look. It'd be nice to see. Go back to the Jonathan Rea times. When Jonathan Rea came in and rode that Repsol Honda, personally, I think he did brilliantly well. He didn't crash the bloody thing. He finished in the top 7, I think, didn't he? I think it was something like that.
Yeah.
Rode it really, really well, considering it's the first time. And everybody kind of overlooked it. I think Jonathan Rea, he should have been in MotoGP years ago. It still annoys the hell out of me that he never had that opportunity at an age where he should have been coming in. Class rider at the top of his game. And he came in and did those 2 rides. But before I go off on a ramble for the whole of Northern Ireland, the fact of the matter is I wonder whether this rider market is going to get bigger come 2024 as well. We've got a lot of things coming up for next year. I think they're going to have to sign more riders, have more riders, in reserve. If we're going to be 42 races, the possibility of riders, it's so easy to get injured. I mean, like 220 mile an hour motorbikes, even at the slowest off. I mean, if you've jumped out your car at 30 mile an hour and rolled up the road in your leathers and your helmet, you'd hurt yourself. And these guys are falling off at much quicker speeds than that. They're getting clattered now and again. Even when they don't fall off and they go into a big tank slapper or whatever it might be. I've known guys that have broken their wrist just by the fact the bikes are snapped back out of them off the suspension. They're all carrying injuries by the time we get to sort of 3, 4, 5 rounds in. Everybody has got some kind of injury. So this backup that I keep banging on about, I can see becoming a bigger issue.
Well,
and because the contract, I suppose the point, Pete, is they're contracted. They're allowed 10 days, I think.
Yes.
Without having a second rider on it. So if after 10 days somebody can't come back, they've got to replace him with somebody. That might well become an issue by mid-season.
Well, what you're saying, Keith, it's already there almost, isn't it? With Repsol Honda, both their guys are injured. Now we're expecting Marc to come back, but theoretically at the moment they're both unfit to ride. Okay, you've got Stefan Bradl, but they would then need another rider, wouldn't they? By Spain, if you like. So the situation you're talking about, Keith, it could already potentially happen, or just by round 3 or 4. So yeah, it's definitely something to there could be a problem.
The reason I'm smiling is because I can see them raiding the television commentary boxes, because already they've got Stefan Bradl out of commentary for German television. I can see Hodgson being dragged out by Hodgie was funny at the weekend when he did his track. He did his track guide. Sylvain Guintoli was absolutely pissing himself because Hodgie was out of breath by the time they got to turn 4. It was hilarious. Sylvain, I love Sylvain Guintoli. I mean, he's fast, he's sharp, he's bloody funny. And he couldn't resist it. Hodgie really was. It's a fast track. It's a physical track as well. It might be low grip, which means that you normally get a bit more time off. But Hodgie obviously hasn't been training lately. He has only just recently got married, so he might still be having a bit of the old cake on him.
Bless him. Before we come on to a bit of Moto2, Moto3 action, you mentioned Maverick Vinales a few moments ago, Keith, and for Aprilia, I mean, the weekend started off quite well, but then it seemed to actually get worse and worse towards the races.
Well, I mean, does it get worse and worse, or did he stay the same and everyone else got used to it and got better? I mean, that's the difficult, isn't it? Sometimes you can start off and you think, wow, I'm on for it this weekend, and then all of a sudden you get swamped by everyone else around you because they're all getting used to the conditions and finding traction. It's a really weird track. I mean, we talk about it being low grip. Everyone says low grip. What does that mean? Yeah, it's not quite got the same amount of grip in the dry as some of the other tracks. And you've got a couple of flat, turn 5 where you see people trying to outbrake each other at the end of that 200 odd mile an hour straight. It's it's got no camber to it at all. It's just dead flat. So you're running in there trail braking. By trail braking, you're hard on the brakes. And as you start to tip in, you come off the brakes, come off the brakes, come off the brakes, come off the brakes until you're right there, and then burp, you pick it up. And as soon as you go burp, as I'd like to say, as soon as you touch that throttle, it takes the weight off the front, and on a flat camber surface, it just folds under. Pick it up on your knee if you're really, really good, or lucky. But it's kind of low grip in the dry, but abrasive and grippy in the wet. Now, how does that work? It was done. Jarno Zeffirelli, who you'll be familiar with, both of you will be familiar with. Jarno Zeffirelli of Dromo, I think, is his company, isn't he? His Italian firm. They reconfigured Termas de Rio Hondo, like they have done Sepang and various other tracks around the world. Really good company. Zeffirelli seems to have got it worked out for bikes. He seems to kind of know what we need, and he basically reconfigured Termas gave us what we've got. And it's a brilliant racetrack, but the surface, again, you might be able to design a perfect racetrack, but the aggregates that you get in, northern Argentina aren't the same as what you get in downtown Derby or wherever it might be. So you can never be absolutely sure. I remember when he did Sepang. Yeah, they revamped that horrible last corner, the hairpin, and he put this adverse camber, the other adverse camber on it, because it used to fill up with water on the inside when we had a storm there. And we had a storm every day in Sepang because that's how it is in Southeast Asia. But he put the camber the other way, which meant that the cars could go either inside, which was a bit slow, or right the way around the outside, and the bikes got used to it as well. But the water drained away towards the gravel trap. But they ran out of the whatever tarmac mix that they were using. So half the front straight had one type of tarmac mix, and the other side had, and one side was grippier to get away from, particularly if it was damp, than the other side. It's crazy. You get that sometimes when the grandstand is on the side of racetrack, and it's rain. On one side the sun is on, so you get a dry blast off area, and the other side is wet. And that was, and somehow Zeffirelli managed to get that on Sepang in all conditions down that front straight.
But it's exactly, and coming back to Aprilia, that seemed to be their fortunes, wasn't it? As soon as it started raining, their performance was gone. As you say, Harry, they looked great on Friday. I think I can't remember if it was Maverick was in front of Aleix, but Aleix was looking the best for race pace, let's say. But both of them were quick. They were all up there, and as soon as the rain arrived, their fortune sort of went downhill. And especially on Sunday, all of them, and even Raul on the year-old bike. So there must be something about the Aprilia DNA. They all complain lack of traction. They didn't know quite why, but difficult bike to ride in the wet. So maybe the only real weakness of the Aprilia at the moment is in the wet.
Yeah, it's hard to fathom that kind of problem, isn't it? But definitely you're right, Pete, in that they all suffered from it. So, and it can be power delivery. It can be that power delivery. If it's not, it could be just a software thing. They could dial it in better if they'd had more wet time, perhaps.
That is exactly, actually, you mentioned it, Keith, what Raul Fernandez says. He thinks it's too aggressive. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that initial tap, I think that there's quite a few race teams that have been working on that this year. That initial tap where you just touch it in, excuse me, folks, that's really important. You kind of want it to be aggressive. It's funny, a mate of mine, he's got the same car as mine, and he said, it goes like stink now. I said, how can it go like stink? What have you done to it? He said, nothing. We put this new throttle control box on it. And all it does is when you touch it, it just gives you like 3/4 throttle early on rather than the progressive tiny bit of throttle. It's the only analogy I can make to a normal person. When you touch the throttle on your car and you push it down harder and harder and harder to make it go faster and faster and faster and rev a bit more, my mate has got this bit of electronics that he's stuck under his foot somewhere that now when he just touches it, he only has to touch it and think, and it's out your hand straight away. Well, that's a similar thing to how some of these bikes, they are unbelievably powerful. But that initial tap, if you've got something that's a bit aggressive, it's trying to get out from underneath you, particularly on low grip tracks or in the wet, and you've really got to be careful. You've really got to wait for it to come to you. If it delivers in an aggressive manner, it's out from under you down the road. Or worse still, it delivers in a way that just takes the weight off the front and you fold the front up and down you go. Tricks of the trade, they're all working on it. By the way, I'm not going to get one of them boxes for my car.
I've been in the passenger seat of your car once, Keith. You don't need it. Let's talk Moto2.
I've got heavy foot.
Let's talk Moto2 now. Alonso Lopez turned a late dash for a new tyre into a new record for pole, but couldn't take the win. That went to Tony Arbolino and Jake Dixon, who became a father and got onto the podium in third after running up front in the early stages. A good Moto2 race by all standards, Keith.
Yeah, I mean, congratulations to Jake and Sarah. I mean, a beautiful couple and a beautiful baby. And I have some sympathy for him because I've missed 2 of the births of 4 of my children from being at racetracks. I've known riders and drivers and racing people and broadcasters who have dumped their job to go back to oversee what's going on. But Jake was obviously in a position where he couldn't do that, and I've been in that position personally as well. And it's quite difficult when you're away from home and something as dramatic as that is going on. And the relief, I think it was Gintoli, again, Sylvain, good old Sylvain. he said something along the lines of that this could, I think Sylvain's got 6 kids, I think, so he knows about this stuff. Basically, he said that this might be something that inspires into something even greater. Now that he's got that massive weight and that worry, even though he will have denied it was a worry, I'm sure, but it always is. Out of the way, baby delivered, everything, mum's safe, baby's safe, everybody's happy. He can now concentrate 100%. And the wet weather, you would have said, might have really suited Jake as well. So I could see where Sylvain was coming from when he sort of predicted that Jake could be the man for the win. But podium finish for Jake, it's good stuff. The wins are coming for Jake. I have no doubt about that in my heart. Now that he's got to the point where he's got to. It's a funny old thing, growing up. You go from hairy-ass biker, quick everywhere, bloody good fun, British Superbike rider as he was, always grinning and jumping about and Jack the Lad and all the rest of it, to where he is now, married, father, potential, Grand Prix winner, all of those things. They're all coming to a point now. They're coming to a head. He's at that age now where all of that stuff is going to start being positive. And I feel Jake is right on the cusp of being able to do the business this year. So when he gets that first one out of the way, mind you, we've been saying about that for Zarco for years, haven't we?
Don't jinx it.
Just go back to the MotoGP. Yeah, I mean, Acosta, bad race, wasn't it, for him? I don't know whether wet conditions maybe his sort of weakness. He was looking all good until the rain arrived, and I think it was 12th place, wasn't it, in the end? So whereas you had Jake and the other guys that really excelled in those conditions, Alonso Lopez in second between them. Difficult one for Acosta. I'm not exactly sure what, but you should see from the gesturing when he came back that he just didn't have the feel that he wanted in those conditions. So, not quite following up the Portimao victory in the way that he obviously would have liked. But and further back, who was it? Sergio Garcia. I think he had an amazing ride at something like 28th to 5th or something with a penalty as well. So
Well, you mentioned penalties. Aaron Canet, double, he jumped start, clearly a jump start. I mean, he got that brilliant double long lap penalty. And the penalty wasn't brilliant, but how he handled it was. He was dirty old slipstream, track round the outside, and he rode it like you thought, oh, don't go in there too quick, because you come into it quite quick on the brakes, it's tight, and then it opens out. I think he lost 1 point something seconds on the first one that he did, and it was his fastest lap, I think, on the next one, something along those lines, or he equalled his fastest lap at that point on his second round. So he lost effectively over the 2 long lap penalties about 1.8 seconds, I think it was. And only a place or 2 places, I think he managed to, because coming out of the long lap penalty strip, you got more acceleration there. You could blast past anybody that had gone under you. So you end up overtaking people coming out of the place. So Canet was on it despite his jump start.
And
Binder
one guy
6th as well.
Binder is 6th, yeah, but that was his best of his young Moto2 career today, wasn't it? Yeah, so he's getting there. One guy who wasn't there, of course, Ayagura. He did come back this weekend, but withdrew from the race. So, unfortunately, that wrist injury is obviously fairly serious scaphoid break. So it's one of those that's slow to heal, isn't it?
Oh, I can tell you. Everyone's done a scaphoid. If they've not done a collarbone, they've done a scaphoid, one or the other. Mine's a scaphoid. And 3 months. You can be 3 months. Court Ballington, go back to the double 250, 350 world champion of the 70s and 80s. Court Ballington, because when he first came to the UK, he got no money, lived in a van. Can you believe it? That was the South African. I mean, you'll have to look him up if you're younger than me. But Ballington, he couldn't afford to not race. He had to race in international races to make enough money to go to the next race. Him and Bronwyn, his wife, who were living in this bloody van. And he broke his scaphoid. And if you carry on riding, if you don't have it pinned, you can get them pinned. But they've got no blood supply. It's a bone with very little blood supply. And once it departs, and you don't let it heal, that's it. It never joins back up again. Oof. And it can be a problem later in life, particularly for motorbike racers. So it's I broke one in 82, and it just took 3 months. I rode with it, but doctor's orders kept saying every time they x-rayed it, it wasn't joining back up and all the rest of it. And it can be a real problem. But you can get through the pain. It's just a question of whether you want the bone to join up again later.
Delightful. Lovely. If you're having this over your lunch or your dinner.
It's honestly, it's not a big deal. It sounds like it is, but it's not. I mean, it obviously hurts because you broke it, but it's a nothing thing. It's like collarbones. Collarbones, you can break a collarbone. Look at Lorenzo at Assen a few years ago. Broke his collarbone on the first session, cleared off to Spain, had it pinned, came back and raced in the race. You know, like even my old mate Steve Parrish, he's got both of his done, and he's a wimp.
Right, okay. Hi, Steve, if you're watching. Moto2, Tony Arbolino leads the championship now, ahead of Canet, Acosta and Dixon. Top 4, Philip Salach, rounding out the top 5. Moto3, Tatsuki Suzuki with the win in front of Diego Moreira and Andrea Minu. But I know you want to go there straight away, Keith, because Scott Ogden, what a ride.
Yeah, Scott Ogden, he's been somebody that I've been banging the drum about this year, since last year, really. I mean, he looks like the real deal to me. And again, the kind of conditions, I mean, what you got to remember is a lot of riders, you know, are used to these kind of conditions. They've raced in their domestic championships in these kind of conditions. And it can come good. But I think Scott Ogden, like I say, is the real deal. He's riding really, really well. Moto3 was all about new boys, wasn't it? I mean, Jaume Masia, who I got money on, just bloody, you know, down he went. It's one of those situations where, again, it's going to be he who stays unscathed through these early ones, scoring sensible points, is going to be on for the championship by the time we get to the end of the year. Because I think that these rounds are going to count. You're going to need these points moving on. Good to see Suzuki on the top step. You know, brilliant. He looked imperious. There was no one anywhere near him. He didn't look like he made a mistake anywhere when I was watching that race. So, well deserved, brilliant ride. And we've seen it before, haven't we, round there? I mean, just somehow some riders make it click in those conditions. Who was the guy? I'm just trying to think. Who was the guy that was the Malaysian guy that absolutely cleared off? Then his team were on the pit wall, jumping up and down and screaming for him to slow down. Memory's gone regarding that, but you get that quite often, and I feel that Suzuki's team will have been doing the same. You know, like you got a 6-second lead, 7-second lead. Calm yourself.
Then,
but you can't, because you want to keep your concentration going. You need that concentration to keep at that performance.
Well, he had that gap though, didn't he, Pete? And then there was a whole gaggle of cars, which include the likes of, you know, Riccardo Rossi coming on really well in the late stages, but then of course it didn't end too well for him.
No, I mean, there was Mino was back, wasn't he, as well? He started the year without a ride, and there he is. He ends up on the podium. I mean, fantastic comeback for him. All the MotoGP VR46 guys, you know, Academy guys were all waiting there to greet him, weren't they? And he was soaking up the slowdown lap. And then David Almanza, I hope I'm saying his name right. I mean, what a race he was having. You were speaking about Scott Ogden. Unfortunately, they came together, didn't they? And Scott did a little bit of a Marquez in that he lost control under braking and contact with Almanza. And down he went. Scott got, I think it was a 6-second penalty, but only dropped in one place. But unfortunately for Almanza, who was fighting for a podium, he came in. I think he was the replacement for Joel Kelso, who had that accident after the flag at Portimao. So, you know, a shame he didn't get to the flag, because fantastic performance for him. I'm sure he's caught the eye of a lot of teams with that ride.
Carolyn has asked a question. Why do the Moto3 riders flap their legs on corner entry sometimes? Is it another way to show, to slow or control their progress? Love the podcast, and I think the sprint races are great. Thanks, Carolyn.
Why do they what?
Why do they flap their legs on corner entry?
The doctor's dangle. It's known as the doctor's dangle. It was... a
doctor's dangle?
The doctor's dangle, because it's Valentino Rossi who flipped his leg out. But it's kind of one of those ones where, as an old school rider, you kind of think, God, that looks messy, you know. But the effect of it is it obviously is an aero situation as well, but it also forces you back in the seat, puts your backside back towards the rear end. So when you're braking into a corner, it's just got that situation where it's giving you that, you know, rather than all on your arms, you've got a bit of aero pushing you back in there into the back of the seat as well. It's about just positioning the bike, getting the weight in the right place on the bike as well. Plus the fact it's got that kind of aggravating, don't come near me kind of a feel about it. I mean, I'm sure that, you know, Leon Haslam is my favourite for it. Leon Haslam is one of the shortest blokes I know, with the longest doctor's dangle you've ever seen in your life. He sticks his leg right out into right out into the face of everyone trying to get by him. But you end up in a situation quite often. Look at Loris Baz. He's getting run over the other week. And it's caused him a huge. I think was it Alex Lowe's who ran over him. I think he stuck his foot out in World Superbikes, and it can be. I'm amazed there are more people that have got caught up with it. But if you don't want your foot running over, be a bit careful where you stick it. Well, I only ever stick my foot in my mouth.
Yeah. There you go, Carolyn. They got more for you bargained for with that answer. Well, just to see off Moto3, it's Daniel Holgado leads the championship, ahead of Moreira, Suzuki, Munoz, and Nepa in the top 5. We run over time pretty much. We're there. But before we fade away, just need to do a little plug because Keith and I are going to be seeing each other on Saturday. This Saturday.
Darling.
At the at Silverstone for round 1 of the British Superbike Championship, and we're doing a little live chinwag. If you would like to come and join us, I think it starts at about 6:00 in the evening on Saturday, outside the Pit Stop Cafe or inside if it's raining. Pete is rudely not in the country, so he's not there. So if you're there, do come along, say hello, and have a chat. We should have some good guests planned as well. But that's this Saturday for the BSB about 6:00 in the evening. So after all the action's done and just before the music starts. So hopefully we'll see you then. But in the meantime, I think we're done. I think we're out of here. Any last words? Have I missed anything? We all good?
I think you've done pretty well. I think it was Kyril Idem-Powie who was the guy that cleared off in the distance in the wet back in the Moto3 days. Sorry.
Had to get that in.
I had to have a quick look. I'm sure that's who it was. I think it was 2015.
Now, actually, one thing to settle this. Who gets the point for biggest surprise? Because Pete has said Bezzecchi. Now, was that really a surprise, though?
This is the debate we had, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, yeah. Now I'm thinking...
Yeah.
Whereas I said Morbidelli, and I think that's more of a surprise. Let us know what you think in the comments. Who gets that point? And Keith went for Alex Marquez, so just to keep you in mind there. We'll add all those points in at the end. Right, we'll have a break, and then we're back for Kota. So we'll see you then. In the meantime, make sure you tuned in across crash.net for all the very latest news and analysis across the week. And we will be back with you next week. We'll fill the airwaves, don't worry. Get your questions in, leave them in the comments section, tweet, Instagram or Facebook us. Just search Crash MotoGP, or you can voice note us. The email is podcast@crash.net. Leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, and we shall see you right back here next week. Bye-bye.